5 world records, 1 game, 19 minutes on the floor. And then the very next night, the ball stopped finding her hands. That contrast, that whiplash between what happened against Senegal and what unfolded against Puerto Rico is not just a basketball story. It is a window into something much bigger, something that has been building around Caitlin Clark since the moment she entered professional basketball, and something that is not going away regardless of how many record books she rewrites. Because here is what nobody is talking about loudly enough. Clark came back from 8 months off the court, stepped into one of the most high-pressure environments in international basketball, and produced a performance so historically dominant that FIBA had to go back through decades of records just to confirm what they had witnessed. And then, 24 hours later, her own teammates were making reads that kept her standing wide open on the perimeter, while the offense stumbled through possessions like it had forgotten what good basketball looked like. And when the cameras turned to her after all of it, after the hero ball, after the freeze out, after a coach who somehow could not find her name at the podium, Clark walked up to that microphone and said something nobody in that room could have predicted. She talked about rhythm, she talked about chemistry, she talked about the team figuring it out together. No frustration, no carefully aimed comments designed to let the internet fill in the blanks, no sideways glance at the people who had spent 40 minutes making sure she touched the ball as little as possible. Just composure, clean, unshakable, almost unsettling composure from a player who had every single reason in the world to say something completely different. That response tells you exactly who Caitlin Clark is, and it exposes everything about what the people around her are doing right now. 8 months is a long time to be away from anything you love. 8 months away from competitive basketball for someone who had spent years redefining what the sport even looked like is an entirely different kind of weight. It started with a groin injury, then a leg issue followed, then the ankle. Clark was only 13 games into her second WNBA season when her body finally reached a point where continuing was no longer a real option. 13 games in a season where the Indiana Fever had genuine playoff ambitions, genuine momentum, genuine belief that the team building around her was starting to take shape. And then it was over, just like that. The months that followed were not the kind that come with easy distractions. When you were a player at Clark's level, when you were someone who has been described as a generational talent since you were playing high school basketball in Iowa, sitting out is not just physically frustrating, it is psychologically brutal. You watch the league move forward without you, you watch the conversations happen around your absence, you watch people start to wonder whether the version of you that broke records and shifted cultural conversations about women's basketball was going to come back looking the same. Nobody could honestly answer that question. Not her coaches, not her teammates, not the analysts who had spent years tracking her every game. Injuries at that level, piling on top of each other the way hers had, have a tendency to change players in ways that do not always show up immediately. Sometimes the hesitation is physical, sometimes it is mental, sometimes it is both, and you do not find out which one you are dealing with until the lights are on and the ball is live, and 8 months of recovery either held or it did not. When Clark stepped back onto the floor for Team USA against Senegal, she was not starting, she was coming off the bench, which makes everything that happened next even more remarkable because she did not come in with the first unit's rhythm, with the opening possession energy, with the built-in momentum of setting the tone from tip-off. She came in cold, into a new environment, with new teammates, under international rules, in front of a crowd and a camera setup that had already made her the face of the entire tournament before she played a single minute. And in 19 minutes, she answered every question anyone had ever thought to ask about her comeback. Let's be precise about what happened, because the numbers here are not the kind you can skim past and really understand. They require context to land properly. 17 points, 12 assists, 0 turnovers. That's the final line. But the raw stat line does not tell the whole story, because the most staggering part of what Clark did against Senegal was not spread evenly across the game. The first half alone, specifically the stretch where she was orchestrating the offense and connecting everything around her, produced 8 assists. 8! And in that entire stretch, not one player from Senegal took the ball from her. Not once. She moved, she read, she distributed, and every single touch was clean. FIBA went back through their records after this game. Not just recent records, their entire history. Every qualifying tournament, every national team debut, every performance by any player from any country coming off any bench in the history of international competition at that level. Here's what they found.
The most assists by any player in any FIA qualifying games first half, ever. Not just among American players, not just among guards. Every player, every country, every era. Clark's 8 first-half assists sat alone at the top of that list when the research was finished. Most assists by any player in a Team USA senior national team debut. The history of American women's international basketball runs deep and is full of legendary performances from players who defined the sport for decades. Clark's debut against Senegal produced more assists than any of them had managed in their first appearance at the senior national team level. Most assists in any senior national team debut across every country in FIA history. This one is worth sitting with. Every country, every player who has ever made their first senior national team appearance at this level, going back through the entire documented history of the competition. Clark's 12 assists in 19 minutes of debut action sit at the top of that list. Second most assists in the entire history of FIA qualifying tournaments. Not second most in a debut, second most in any game by any player at any point in their career in the qualifying stage of FIA competition. Clark did this in her first 19 minutes back from 8 months off the floor. Most assists ever recorded by any player coming off the bench in FIA history. Not just in qualifying, in any FIA competition. The bench record, the one that accounts for the disadvantage of coming in without the opener's momentum or timing, belongs to Clark after a single game back from injury. 5 records, 1 game, 19 minutes. Kara Lawson, who had been watching all of this unfold from the sideline, spoke afterward about the second quarter lineup. Clark, alongside Ryan Howard, Kelsey Plum, Kiki Iriunian, and Monique Billings, had carved through Senegal with a rhythm and efficiency that made the entire operation look effortless. Lawson's own assessment was direct. That unit, she said, took Team USA to a different level. Those were her words. The coach's own words about a lineup anchored by a player she had not even trusted with a starting spot. FIA did not need any convincing. They put Clark's face on every piece of tournament marketing material, not split across the roster, not a group shot with her included. Her face, singular, as the representative image of the entire competition. The Puerto Rico coach's own daughter showed up to the next game holding a Clark sign in the stands. The signals coming from every direction were pointing the same way. And then the Puerto Rico game started. What happened against Puerto Rico is the kind of thing that is very easy to explain away in the moment and very difficult to justify when you actually go back and watch the film. Kara Lawson was rotating lineups throughout the game. That part is understandable. This is still an early stage of building a roster for a major international tournament and experimenting with combinations. Seeing how different players read each other in live game situations is a legitimate coaching decision. Roster evaluation at this stage of a qualification campaign is not just acceptable, it is necessary. But roster evaluation does not explain the ball distribution. That part requires a different explanation, and the film does not provide a flattering one. Kayla Cooper was playing hero ball. There is no softer way to say it that still accurately describes what was happening. Holding the ball, pulling up off the dribble without reading the floor, forcing her way into traffic against a Puerto Rico defense that was perfectly willing to let her make those decisions, because those decisions were helping Puerto Rico far more than they were helping Team USA. And Clark, on multiple possessions throughout that game, was standing wide open on the perimeter. Not slightly open, not the kind of open where maybe Cooper looked and decided the angle was not right, wide open. The kind of open that in any normally functioning basketball offense results in an immediate ball movement, because you do not pass up an open Caitlin Clark unless you have decided, for reasons that have nothing to do with winning, that you are not going to pass up an open Caitlin Clark.
Cooper was not finding her. Not once, not twice, but in a pattern that repeated itself throughout 40 minutes and never corrected regardless of the result. Angel Reese was making reads that consistently left Clark on the outside looking in, Possession after possession, Reese was pushing pace in a direction that brought the ball to someone else, someone off the ball, someone who had not set up the action the way Clark was setting it up on the other side. The reads were not random, they were consistent, and consistently they pointed away from the most dangerous playmaker on the floor. Here is the part of this that is genuinely impossible to argue with because it does not require any interpretation. Every single time Clark touched the ball against Puerto Rico, something productive happened. A kick-out that found a shooter, a drive into the paint that forced the defense to collapse and drew a foul, a skip pass that moved Puerto Rico's zone and opened up a better look. Every possession where Clark was the one making decisions for Team USA, the offense had direction, it had pace, it looked like something intentional was happening. Every stretch where she was standing on the perimeter watching Cooper dribble into a double team or Reese push in the wrong direction, the offense flatlined, slower, disconnected, like 5 players who had not quite agreed on what they were supposed to be doing and were each individually hoping someone else figured it out before the shot clock ran out. The film is not ambiguous about this. You can go possession by possession and watch the pattern. Clark touches it, Team USA has a pulse. Clark stands on the perimeter watching, Team USA looks like a completely different team, and not a better one. Puerto Rico's zone was already exposing how dependent Team USA's rhythm is on Clark pushing pace and making reads. Against a team at Puerto Rico's level, that exposure was manageable, uncomfortable but survivable. The games ahead on this schedule are not Puerto Rico. When the game ended, Carol Lawson stepped to the microphone, and she talked about a lot of things, combinations she wanted to look at, areas where the team needed to improve, the challenge of building chemistry early in a qualifying campaign, the kind of coaching language that covers a lot of ground while committing to very little. What she did not do was say Caitlin Clark's name in any meaningful context. The most watched player in women's basketball, the player FIA had chosen as the face of the entire tournament, the player who had just rewritten 5 international records in her first 19 minutes back from injury, the player who was visibly open on multiple possessions throughout the game. Lawson found ways to navigate the podium without landing on that name directly. It was a deliberate kind of omission, the kind that takes more effort to maintain than just saying the obvious thing out loud. That gap between what happened on the floor and what came out of that press conference is not a minor thing, it is a statement. Coaching choices communicate priorities, and press conference navigation communicates them just as clearly. When a coach finds ways to talk around the most prominent and productive player on the roster after a game where that player was visibly underutilized, the message being sent is not subtle, even if it is unspoken. And it matters more because of what is coming. Puerto Rico's zone is fundamentally built to slow down ball movement and create confusion in the half court. It exposed Team USA's dependence on Clark's pace in a way that was visible and uncomfortable. The teams higher up on this schedule, Spain, Italy, the opponents with real defensive rotations and the athleticism to punish slow half-court decisions, are going to do exponentially more damage with the same approach. You cannot walk the ball up against Spain and expect forced mid-range pull-ups to bail you out. That is not basketball that holds at this level. It is not even close to a formula that holds at this level. Lawson knows the schedule, she knows what is coming, and the choice to navigate around Clark's name at the podium after a game that loudly demonstrated exactly why Clark needs to be the engine of this offense is a choice that will either get corrected quickly or get exposed badly. There is not a comfortable middle option between those two outcomes. Now, here is the part that matters most. Here is the part that reveals more about Caitlin Clark's character than any of the records or statistics or film breakdowns ever could. She walked to that microphone knowing what the game had looked like. She walked up there knowing that viewers watching at home had watched the pattern.
She walked up there knowing that every analyst with access to the film could see, possession by possession, exactly what had been happening around her. She walked up there having spent 40 minutes watching teammates make decisions that kept the ball out of her hands, and having heard a coach conduct a post-game press conference that managed to discuss the performance without finding her name.
And she talked about rhythm. She talked about the pace being off. She pointed to Puerto Rico's zone as a defensive scheme that disrupted the offense's flow. She said the team would figure it out. She said it calmly, clearly, without a single word or pause or raised eyebrow that could be clipped and used to suggest she was pointing at anyone specific. No names, no frustration bleeding through carefully professional language, no answers designed to be technically accurate while letting the internet connect the dots she was too strategic to connect publicly. Nothing that could be characterized as throwing anyone under the bus, not even the kind of throwing that has plausible deniability built into it. Think about what that composure actually required in that specific moment. Cooper had been out there running hero ball while Clark stood open. Reese had been making reads that conveniently redirected possession away from the most dangerous option on the floor. Lawson had navigated an entire press conference without finding Clark's name at the podium. And Clark, after all of it, talked about chemistry, about figuring it out together, about the team getting better. That is not easy. That is not a default setting for any competitive athlete who has just watched their own teammates make choices that prioritized individual positioning over collective success. That kind of composure is built. It is practiced. It is the product of a player who has decided, at some point through whatever combination of experience and character and long-term thinking, that the public version of her story is going to be the team-first version no matter what is happening privately. Everyone else in that situation was doing something for themselves. Cooper protecting her role. Reese making reads that kept her in the action at the expense of the most open option. Lawson managing a press conference in a way that avoided a direct and honest conversation about the game's most obvious tactical story. Clark was the only person in that room whose answer was entirely about winning, not about her role, not about her narrative, not about making sure the record reflected well on her, about the team figuring it out. That contrast is the entire story of Caitlin Clark's career, compressed into a single post-game press conference. She is consistently the most team-first voice in rooms where other people are consistently doing things that have nothing to do with the team. Here is what makes the Puerto Rico situation land differently than it might if it were an isolated incident. It is not isolated, not even close. Clark spent the 2025 Indiana Fever season navigating Stephanie White's offensive philosophy. White's system is fundamentally built around off-ball movement, players relocating, finding gaps, creating through cutting and spacing rather than through a primary ball handler dictating tempo. It is a legitimate offensive approach when the personnel fits it. It is a very specific kind of problem when your best player is someone whose greatest asset is exactly the thing your system is designed to minimize: the ability to push pace, read the floor at speed, and make decisions with the ball in her hands that other players simply cannot replicate. Clark spent last season proving she could be productive inside a system that was not optimized for her strengths, in the same way a sprinter proves they can run in boots. She did it. The results were there. But the results came in spite of the framework rather than because of it. And anyone watching closely enough could see the gap between what she was producing and what she could produce if the system was designed to use her the way the data and the film both suggest she should be used. And then she left Indianapolis for the national team camp, presumably expecting a different environment. Presumably expecting that a roster built around collective talent rather than a pre-existing coaching philosophy might give her the kind of operational freedom that produces the Senegal performance rather than the Puerto Rico one. What she found instead was Cooper's hero ball and Reese's redirected reads and a coach who talked around her name at the podium. The same player, different uniform, same pattern. That pattern is not a coincidence. That pattern is something Clark is going to have to carry with her everywhere she goes until either the people making decisions around her recognize what the data and the film and the FIBA record books are all saying simultaneously, or she finds herself in an environment where the decision-makers are willing to put winning above whatever else is driving these choices. She goes back to Indianapolis after this tournament carrying a complete picture of exactly what it looks like when a system decides to make her smaller. She has now watched it happen in 2 different contexts, with 2 different coaching staffs, with different teammates, under different competitive circumstances. The common thread in both situations is her. The outcome in both situations is the same.
Let's talk about what the upcoming schedule actually means, because this is where the basketball stakes become genuinely serious and the consequences of the current approach stop being theoretical. Puerto Rico is a solid team. Their zone creates problems and their discipline is real. But Puerto Rico is not a team built to exploit every structural weakness in a half-court offense at the highest level of international competition. The teams coming up on this schedule are built exactly for that. Spain runs defensive rotations that are specifically designed to make slow half-court basketball pay. Their ability to identify and exploit indecision, a ball handler holding, a misread, a possession where nobody has a clear role, is not accidental. It is schematic. It is what their defensive system is built around. A Team USA offense that is walking the ball up and depending on isolated hero ball decisions from players who are not reading the floor at the pace the defense is applying pressure is going to get carved apart by a system like that. Not occasionally, consistently. Italy brings athleticism to the equation that Puerto Rico simply does not have. Athletic defensive teams do not just expose slow half-court offense in the abstract, they punish it specifically in the moments where ball movement breaks down, because they have the quickness to rotate and contest in the gaps that open up when nobody is pushing pace. Every possession where Cooper is holding the ball and Clark is standing open on the perimeter against a team with Italy's athletic profile is a possession where the defense has time to set, rotate, and eliminate the open look that should have been hit 2 passes earlier. The teams at the top of the FIBA World Rankings did not get there by being beatable by the kind of basketball Team USA played against Puerto Rico. They got there by being extremely good at the specific thing that Team USA was demonstrating it cannot do when Clark is not running the offense: maintaining rhythm, maintaining pace, making reads at speed, and punishing the moments when a defense gives up an open look by actually taking that open look. Clark standing wide open on the perimeter is not an open look that Puerto Rico's zone can fully punish, because Puerto Rico's zone is designed to create exactly that situation and then live with the results. It is an open look that Spain's rotations and Italy's athleticism can and will punish, because their defensive systems are built on the assumption that if you create enough structural chaos, the offense will eventually hold the ball, miss the read, and give you a chance to recover. Except the recovery never needs to happen if the ball finds Clark, and Clark does what she does every single time she actually touches it. The math here is not complicated. The film is not ambiguous. The upcoming schedule is not forgiving, and the decision about whether this gets corrected before a stronger team exposes it badly is entirely in Kara Lawson's hands right now. There is another layer to this conversation that does not get enough attention, and it lives in the space between what Clark said at the podium and what that composure actually demands from the people around her. Leadership in professional and international basketball does not only show up in points and assists, it shows up in how players respond when things are going badly, in whether the most talented person in the room chooses to protect their narrative or protect the team's ability to get better. It shows up in the gap between what a player knows and what they say publicly, and what they choose to do with that gap. Clark is 23 years old. She is 2 years into a professional career that has already generated the kind of cultural conversation most athletes never produce across an entire decade. She has been the target of physical and competitive attention since her first WNBA game that would have broken the professionalism of players with far more experience and far thicker skin.
She has watched coaches build systems around philosophies that minimize her strengths, watched teammates make reads that consistently redirect possession away from her, and watched press conferences where coaches navigate around her name like it requires careful handling. And through it all, she has been the most team-first voice in every room. That is either the most extraordinary display of consistent character in recent sports history, or it is evidence of something darker, that Clark has learned through repeated experience that saying the honest thing publicly costs her more than absorbing it privately. That the public narrative around her, the one that requires her to be gracious, professional, and team-first at all times, functions as a constraint that does not apply equally to the people around her. Cooper can play hero ball, Reese can make redirected reads, Lawson can navigate around Clark's name at the podium, and Clark has to absorb all of it and talk about rhythm and chemistry and figuring it out together. Because the moment she says something different, the conversation shifts from what happened on the floor to whether Caitlin Clark is difficult to play with.
That is not a burden distributed evenly. That is a specific kind of pressure applied to a specific player, and the composure she shows in handling it is remarkable. But remarkable composure should not be required in the first place. A player who just broke 5 international records in her debut 19 minutes back from injury should not be spending the very next game watching the ball avoid her hands. Clark goes back to Indiana when this tournament ends. She goes back to the Fever, back to the facility, back to the off-season that sets up the 2026 season. And she goes back carrying something that she did not have before this run of games. A second, clear, documented, on-film example of what happens when a coaching system decides that managing her role is more important than using her correctly. The Stephanie White situation last season was characterized by some as a first-year coach learning curve, an adjustment period. White figuring out how to integrate the most prominent player in the league into a system that had been built with different personnel priorities. There was room to give that explanation some benefit of the doubt, even if the film was not entirely generous to it. There is less room for that explanation now, because Clark took that same situation, a coaching environment not optimized for her strengths, teammates whose ball distribution choices consistently redirected away from her, into a completely different context with completely different people, and watched the same pattern emerge. That is not a Stephanie White problem. That is a Clark problem, in the sense that it is a problem that follows Caitlin Clark specifically, regardless of who is coaching and who is playing alongside her. Which means when she gets back to Indianapolis and the conversation about the 2026 Fever season begins, she is walking into that conversation with a fuller picture than she had before. She knows exactly what it looks like when the system is working. She produced it in 19 minutes against Senegal, and the record books confirmed it. She knows exactly what it looks like when the system is not working. She watched it for 40 minutes against Puerto Rico, and the film confirmed it. She knows the difference between being used correctly and being managed carefully, and she has now experienced both in direct succession under international spotlight. The question for Indianapolis is whether the people making decisions about the 2026 Fever season have the same clarity she does, and whether they are willing to act on it. Whether the offensive philosophy going into next season is built around what the data and film say about how to maximize this team's potential, or whether it is built around a different set of priorities that has consistently produced slower, more disconnected basketball that underperforms its own talent. Clark should not have to prove anything at this point. The FIA record books made an argument after one game that is difficult to counter with anything other than more film, more records, and more of the same story. But the reality of where she is in her career is that she is still in environments where the people around her are making choices that require her to keep proving it anyway. Step back from the immediate tournament for a moment, because what is happening around Caitlin Clark right now connects to something much larger than any single qualifying campaign. Women's basketball in America is at a specific kind of inflection point.
The viewership numbers, the attendance figures, the cultural attention that followed Clark from Iowa into the WNBA, all of it represented something that the sport had been building toward and had not quite reached before her arrival. The conversation about women's basketball expanded, the audience expanded, the expectations around what the sport could look like commercially and culturally expanded. And in the middle of all of that expansion, the systems around Clark have consistently found ways to operate as though the old priorities still apply, as though the calculus of managing roles and protecting individual positioning and navigating coaching philosophy takes precedence over the simpler question of what produces the best basketball, the question of what actually wins. Clark breaking 5 FIA records in her comeback game is the kind of moment that in a functional system produces an immediate and obvious response. Run the offense through the engine that just demonstrated it can rewrite international record books in 19 minutes. The response Team USA actually produced was a Puerto Rico game where that engine stood on the perimeter watching the ball go elsewhere.
The disconnect between those two outcomes is not a basketball mystery. It is not a question of competitive complexity or coaching nuance, or the difficulty of building chemistry quickly in international competition. It is a question of whether the people making decisions are putting winning first. And the film, the possession data, and the press conference navigation all point toward the same uncomfortable answer. Clark is operating in an environment where she is simultaneously the most valuable asset and the most managed piece of the puzzle, where her talent is undeniable enough that FIA puts her face on their marketing and her records fill their history books, and where the people on the floor and in the coaching staff around her are still making choices that function to contain rather than unleash what she does. She handles it with a composure that should not be required of her. She talks about the team at every podium. She absorbs every possession where the ball goes somewhere else and comes back the next play ready to execute whatever the offense needs. She does all of this while the record books keep saying the same thing in louder and louder terms. Here is where everything lands. Here is the simplest version of the story. There is a player in this tournament who just broke 5 international records in 19 minutes back from an 8-month injury. The data says she should be running the offense, the film says she should be running the offense, the FIA record books say she should be running the offense, the results of every possession she touched against Puerto Rico say she should be running the offense. There is a coach who has to make a decision before stronger opponents show up and make the decision for her. If Lawson figures it out, if she looks at the possession data and the film and the record books and the straightforward evidence of what happened against Senegal versus what happened against Puerto Rico, Team USA becomes genuinely dangerous. Not just dangerous in the sense of a team with talent, dangerous in the sense of a team with a system, with a pace, with a playmaker running the operation who has already demonstrated she can produce historic results in the first 19 minutes of her comeback. If Lawson does not figure it out, Clark will keep walking to that microphone. She will keep talking about rhythm and chemistry and the team figuring it out together. She will keep absorbing every possession that should have found her hands and every press conference that navigates around her name. She will do all of it with the same composure that should honestly alarm the people making decisions around her, because the composure is not an indication that everything is fine. It is an indication that Clark has simply decided that her public response to an ongoing problem is not going to be the thing that defines her. The stronger opponents ahead on this schedule are not going to care about any of that. Spain and Italy and the teams at the top of this competition do not care about roster management or role protection or coaching philosophy. They care about execution. And when Team USA shows up with a half-court offense that is ignoring its most dangerous playmaker, they're going to find the exact same cracks that Puerto Rico's zone was already beginning to expose. And they're going to find them faster, more consistently, and with the athleticism and defensive sophistication to make Team USA pay the full price. The right decision has never been complicated here.
It was visible in that second quarter Senegal lineup. It was documented in FIA's record books. It was demonstrated possession by possession in the contrast between what Team USA looked like when Clark was running things and what it looked like when she was standing on the perimeter watching the ball avoid her. Lawson has the film, she has the records, she has the data. She has, sitting in her rotation, a player who came back from 8 months off the floor and immediately did something that no other player in the history of international basketball at this level had ever done. The question is not whether the right answer is knowable. The question is whether the right answer gets chosen. She knows all of this. She has known it. She has known it since before the Puerto Rico game started because she was in that Senegal game and she felt what it looked like when the offense had a direction and a pace and a playmaker making decisions. She has known it since Senegal because she was also in the Puerto Rico game and she felt what it looked like when the ball was going elsewhere and the offense was flatlined and teams were watching her stand open and choosing not to correct for it.
She went to that press conference with all of that knowledge, and she talked about rhythm and chemistry and the team figuring it out together. That is who she is. That is the choice she keeps making in context after context, with evidence accumulating on every side that she is operating in systems that are not using her correctly and still choosing to be the team-first voice in the room. It should not be required of her. The records say it should not be required. The film says it should not be required. Every piece of evidence generated by this tournament so far says that the simplest and most obvious decision is to put the ball in Clark's hands and let her run. Because the 19 minutes against Senegal showed the entire world what happens when you do, and the 40 minutes against Puerto Rico showed the entire world what happens when you do not. Clark came back from 8 months off the floor and rewrote the international record books in less than 20 minutes. She then spent 40 minutes watching the ball go to people making decisions designed to keep it away from her. She then walked to a microphone and talked about the team. That is the story. That is the whole story. Not just the records, not just the freeze-out, not just the press conference navigation. All of it together, compressed into 2 nights of basketball that revealed everything about who Caitlin Clark is and everything about what the environment around her keeps doing. The games ahead will tell us whether any of it changes. And if it does not change, if the stronger opponents arrive and the possession data keeps looking the way it looked against Puerto Rico, the outcome will not be the result of a mystery. It will be the entirely predictable result of a decision that was made in plain sight, with all of the evidence already on the table and still made the wrong way. Clark will keep composing herself for every microphone. She will keep talking about the team. She will keep being the most team-first voice in rooms where other people are doing things that have nothing to do with the team. And the record books will keep saying what they have already said, clearly and loudly for anyone willing to read them.